everybody's gonna make the we saw this on Android 3 years ago. Hello, my name is Fiona Gomo, aka Techie Supreme, your supreme source on all things tech, and today we are going to be talking about Apple's keynote for WWDC. So obviously everybody is housebound right now. I personally, I'm in New York City, so we're kind of starting to open up a bit, but kind of, everyone's been breaking the rules and doing whatever they please for the most part. I've been staying inside for the most part myself, but obviously very interesting times right now. So WWDC was an all live streamed event, and I mean, me personally, I'm used to watching it like that. Overall, I've never been to WWDC in person, but hopefully one day. But again, it was pretty interesting experience this year, obviously, because we know that the event was completely pre-recorded as opposed to being live, as most people are used to. And yeah, everybody was on Twitter joking about how there were no demo errors and things like that. Nevertheless, I thought it was pretty interesting. I always enjoy the keynotes for what they are, just kind of for me, experiencing Apple primarily as an outsider, because I do use some Apple products. I am a MacBook user, as you can see, but that's kind of my primary and solitary use of Apple products. I did have an iPhone 10 for a short time just to kind of play around with software updates and things like that, and thinking about getting one in the future. But for me, Apple is just not my main device brand, so I am kind of always observing it from an outsider standpoint for the most part. So it is pretty fascinating to kind of see the things that Apple is doing new this year for their brand. Everybody's gonna make the we saw this on Android 3 years ago joke. I'm like, I get that we joke about that, but I guess for me, I honestly view WWDC and just kind of all of the Apple launches from kind of very fresh eyes and a very just a kind of appreciative of tech as a whole kind of perspective watching this. It's kind of honestly kind of being in a foreign land, because I am so used to Android devices, Android launches, Android reviews and unboxings and things like that. It is just very fascinating to me to watch it and watch these things in a non-judgmental fashion. So I'm just gonna talk about some of I'm not gonna go through the entire keynote, but I'm just gonna talk about some highlights that I personally found interesting from the keynote. As everyone knows, we had all of the update announcements for iOS, iPadOS, we had some tvOS stuff, we had CarPlay, we had macOS, and obviously the introduction of the new silicon specifically for Mac. So just kind of gonna do the general rundown from top to bottom of the things that I was pretty interested in while watching the keynote. So we'll start with iOS. So again, people, like I said, people made the jokes about the Android versus iOS jokes, and it is pretty interesting to see how Apple interprets these features on their own software. What I think is pretty interesting is just the idea of, maybe it's not so much of a copy, but it is kind of just like it makes things kind of like an overall standard, just kind of, like we always just talk about how people talk about how we want devices to be more, to be more seamless and to be more common, and then when it's done, they're not necessarily complaining, but there's always someone who has something to say about it. So for me, I definitely think for me that the most interesting thing about the iOS update was widgets, which for me as an Android user is something that I do use a lot. Being someone who kind of goes through devices pretty often, I can kind of fall out of habit with using my widgets, but I am kind of like a clock widget. I have like step counters and things like that, controllers for music and things like that. I use a lot of widgets like that, and you know, I can definitely, for me, appreciate kind of like the aesthetic that goes into various features in iOS that you don't necessarily get on Android. So again, kind of just watching the announcements and kind of being able to you know, to like kind of pretty up your atmosphere on your device. I thought that was pretty cool. If I am kind of planning to get a new iPhone, again, just kind of to play around with software and things like that. So when that happens, hopefully we will get to play around with iOS 14 and talk a little bit more about the different new aspects of that software. Another thing I thought was interesting was the Siri update, which again for me, you know, handling when I have handled iPhones, that is again, just for as someone who doesn't use iPhones that often, when you get it in hand and you try to do things like use Siri, it can be quite annoying that Siri takes up so much not only space but kind of energy in a way that it is kind of annoying. So I think that would be a lot better to have Siri not take up as much space on your screen. And I actually didn't write it down on my list of topics, but the other thing for me was the picture-in-picture, which for me as an Android user, that is a feature that I use very often on my Android device. Again, kind of just even being at home and things like that, I actually have like an old half-broken exercise machine that I've put into use now that we can't go to the gym. And so I've got like my phone and I'm playing a game, I'm watching TV, I'm going on Facebook, I'm going on Twitter, and I've still got my Netflix in the corner and things like that. So I'm pretty sure iOS users will enjoy that feature because it definitely comes in handy. I don't know if I don't know if it's possible or if I've ever tried to resize. I know we can move around the screen, but I don't know if there's a resize feature on Android. If anybody wants to confirm in the comments, please do. Another feature I thought was interesting again are the updates in messages, especially the inline responses and things like that. Again, as an Android user who most of my friends and family are iPhone users, I am typically the sole Android user in any given group chat, so I kind of often get the runoff, like you get the notification that someone has done something iPhone to iPhone, but I don't see it myself. So like I said, I feel like from my perspective there is that kind of like whimsy, if you will, about iPhone and the things that iPhone users can do with each other. So that kind of layout for group chats and really being able to communicate very intricately within group chats, that is a pretty fascinating feature. I guess for me, the closest thing that I kind of have to that is various third-party apps like Twitter and Instagram and things like that, when you can leave little likes and emojis and things like that directly on a post, and you can see exactly who has paid attention to a specific post. So that's kind of the closest thing that I get to. And like I said, you know, in my world, most people are iOS users. A lot of my Android friends, we don't really chat on the phone like that. We're mostly communicating on social media. If we are chatting one-on-one, it's a DM or something like that, not necessarily a text. So apparently I'm missing out a little bit. And finally, one of my highlighted interests in the iOS update rundown was the key functions for CarPlay. I thought that was pretty fascinating. That just the general concept of using a device to unlock a car, and I was definitely just thinking about just the sense of overall privacy. Apple products are typically known for having a more focus on privacy and things like that. So it probably is more plausible for a feature like this to roll out quickly on a Apple device versus any other operating system. So I'm not a driver myself. I was planning on getting my driver's license this year, but I've had a few unforeseen circumstances, including the pandemic, so I'm personally going to have to wait a little bit, but who knows, maybe once I am driving and in my own car, maybe I'll get an iPhone so that I can unlock my car with my phone. So we're going to move on to iPadOS 14, and for me, again, once you kind of pass the Mac, I'm really kind of far removed from Apple products, kind of really only handling them as needed. So overall, iPad really isn't and I'm not a tablet person in general. Like I barely do very much with Android tablets myself. Like they're just, I've literally got like a Mac and a Windows computer just kind of hanging around. So tablets have just never really been my personal thing. But some things that did interest me was the full screen player for music. I thought that was really cool. I am especially, and it's really interesting because I think about this from various Google I/O keynotes when there's talking about music and how the album designs and things like that are displayed. That's always kind of something that's highlighted in Android. So to kind of see that on iOS again was pretty interesting for me, and even the album art that they showed was really beautiful. So for me, that is definitely kind of a plus in terms of just again artistry and aesthetic. I personally like things like that. Another thing for me was the quick search for apps. So I watched it a couple times, so I still couldn't kind of figure out. I guess it's kind of just like a kind of like tap to bring up search type of thing. I thought that was a pretty interesting feature to kind of have, because when you, again, like even just on kind of like mobile devices in general, it can often be kind of like, if you need to search, you're either going to have to pull up your browser, or kind of like flip through to get to the search bar widget. And so that it can be tedious to kind of do quick searches on your device. And I'm sorry, I don't really care what Apple says. I don't really believe that people are using Siri to search things that much. That's just me. So I think, again, just that quick access to search, and then having this really kind of like system ingrained search, that is actually a pretty cool feature that if I do handle an iPad anytime soon, I'll definitely be checking that out. I will kind of just circle back to iOS for a moment. I did want to mention the I forget what it's called, but just the grouping of the apps. I mean, again, that is a pretty interesting feature. I guess the only thing I can say about that is, because I know when I'm setting up my Android devices, I do, put my apps into their own respective folders and things like that in terms of how I use them, so I can kind of keep keep my home page to a minimum. But I definitely think the idea of kind of having that the curated folders, that's pretty interesting. Again, if you're able to do that on Android, I haven't figured that out myself, but again, I know when I have to, I do my folders manually, because I do like a organized home page. I do, once you kind of like swipe up to get to the main app drawer, that's a different story, but if it's like home page, I need it in order. And kind of definitely knowing exactly where to go to access my most prominent apps. So that was pretty interesting, and more so than the folders itself was the automatic curation of the folders. That was pretty fascinating. So back to iPad. My other interest in the keynote was the Apple Pencil. So again, there's not really an equivalent to that in Android, and again, like I said, watching it from an outsider, the concept of Apple Pencil is pretty fascinating. Again, especially even just thinking about uses. I am a writer. I've got notebooks and pens. So it would be pretty interesting to like just think about the idea of having kind of like of having an electronic version of that in terms of writing. And again, I've always been like a Galaxy Note fan, and I enjoy using the S Pen and things like that, and we do have similar features on that, but it's such, in respect to a tablet, it's a smaller canvas. So there's just that, there's still kind of there's a sense of a limited range of motion that you have in terms of what you can do on the space of a smartphone, even if it's a phablet size. Are we still using that? Even if it's a larger smartphone, large smartphone versus large tablet, and having kind of like a life-size pen to write on, that's pretty fascinating. And then all of the little intricate details that they have added into the Apple Pencil and how it works with the tablet. I definitely thought, for me, one of the most interesting features was being able to like write and then copy your written text and paste it into another app as complete text. That's a pretty cool feature. So again, I would definitely love to. My mom, she's a big iPad fan with her iPads, and check out iOS 14. And finally, the support that was showcased with iPadOS, but it is kind of across platform, the seamless connection between all devices with AirPods. Again, pretty ingrained in Android. I have actually written about how you can connect AirPods to Android devices, but I'm pretty sure a feature like this would be focused on Apple software. So that connection, is the automatic connection while you're transitioning devices, is pretty fascinating, because trying to Bluetooth connect my different devices is one hell of a challenge. Even I just kind of have like a Bluetooth speaker that I was using while I was doing some chores the other day, and then trying to switch to my headphones when I was going out for a walk. That was like a whole production. So again, kind of watching from the outside, like, oh, is there actually such a thing? But I thought that was pretty fascinating. So moving on to the Apple Watch and WatchOS 7. Again, I used to be pretty into smartwatches a few years ago, but I kind of fell out of habit with them. I have a bunch, but I just don't use them. Mostly I feel just because I have the I have the same software on my phone, so I feel like it's kind of easier to just use the phone. That's just kind of how I do things. But so even like, you know, kind of overall, you know, WatchOS, like if I was to be more ingrained in the Apple ecosystem, having a Apple Watch, I don't think is something that I would do. But I definitely did think that two things that I thought were pretty fascinating about that update was the sleep tracker and the dance component for the new Fit app that's now called Fitness. So we'll talk about the sleep tracker. Again, kind of being home, wildly varying sleep patterns. I went to bed at 3 a.m. last night. The night before, I went to bed at 10 p.m. So we have no circadian rhythm over here at all. So I was definitely fascinated by just kind of the concept of having this wind down software that could help you to kind of get into better sleep patterns. One can dream. I don't think I could get into a good sleep pattern even if I had an Apple Watch, but that's just me. And again, I thought it was, again, just the dance component for the new Fitness app I thought was really interesting, because again, you know, I feel, you know, being in the house, dancing around and things like that is also, you know, one way that I try to keep active. And you know, it is challenging to kind of figure out, to be able to count calories in terms of dancing. You know, there's like a million kind of like activity trackers that you can find on the internet, but to really have that, in a more accurate form is kind of hard to come by. I think the closest that I've done, I've actually had a fitness tracker where you have like a heart rate band that you put around your midsection or like your rib cage, so that it can track your heart, and then you wear the fitness tracker so that you can get accurate calories. And so, you know, that's kind of a production to get on, especially if all you're doing is dancing around your house. So I'm pretty sure Apple Watch users will find that pretty fascinating. And then moving on to what Apple talked about with privacy, I also thought was pretty fascinating, because again, even right now, being on lockdown, you know, half of my email list right now are kind of like pitches about privacy and hacking and things like that. So it's really fascinating to hear what different companies are doing in terms of keeping data safe, and kind of the comparison to nutrition facts is really interesting. So kind of just having the list of here's what's being shared and here's what's being tracked. For me, obviously, that's something that I would personally be able to use on my MacBook. So, and you know, that is, you know, one of my most commonly used devices. So I look forward to seeing how that works on Mac personally. And then for home, I again kind of just juxtaposing it to what I'm experiencing right now. I have various smart security cameras around my house, and even, you know, the one that's in front of my house. It, again, funny, kind of just went to take a walk around the block, and my entire walk is just notifications of people walking by my house, and I'm just like, so, you know, that the feature for activity zones was pretty interesting to me. I would personally love to kind of see smart cameras and things like that. Again, maybe I can have some of my family members, maybe we can try and figure out how to sort that out on their iPhones. And then also the live view from your devices or your TV and things like that. I found that pretty fascinating. And even the security cameras that I have has its own version of live view, but again, it is kind of like a start and stop, and it's a little bit clunky. It doesn't work as seamlessly. So again, that is something that I would even just kind of love to play around with for myself. And winding down to macOS, again, there's so much in Mac. I'm just kind of laughing to myself because you guys don't even want to know what version of macOS my computer is running. It's a little bit of a travesty. All I can say is that the remind me later button gets pressed very often during my day. That's all I'll say. To be quite frank, installing, we have macOS 11, so you know, that's kind of even an interesting idea for motivating me to update my Mac. But I was pretty fascinated by the updates to Safari more than anything else, just because a lot of the other updates were things that were kind of already seen in the previous previews for iOS and things like that. So the Safari updates were a little bit more proprietary to the Mac itself. So you know, the extensions and kind of being able to transition extensions from other browsers, and the safety within extensions, and the being able to curate your home page for search. That was also pretty fascinating. Again, kind of not even more so kind of being home. I definitely find myself kind of using the shortcuts that are already on my browsers a lot more than I have in the past. So I could definitely see myself kind of having that be a really cool home base, and even kind of being able to put like that, you know, put your own unique background and things like that on the search bar and things like that. I thought that was pretty cool. And finally, we will talk a little bit about the native silicon, Apple Silicon, for the upcoming Mac computers. And again, even that's pretty fascinating for me, because that is something that would actually affect me personally as a Mac user. So even that is something, you know, where that would actually affect, you know, a future device that I would buy. So me personally, just, you know, kind of just noting that overall as a very fascinating shift, because we've seen it with all of the other products so far, and how it has really just helped Apple kind of maintain itself as, you know, even though there's all of these different systems, you can still kind of work it as one cohesive product, to be quite frank, you know. So to have this addition of Apple Silicon to the MacBook would kind of complete the whole series, unless, you know, there is some new kind of product that would be added to the Apple ecosystem that would then need its own chips. But again, who knows? I'm sure there will be many things in the future. So again, I mean, we've got a long list. This is just kind of the top of my head things that were pretty fascinating to me. So if you found this interesting, I do hope you will consider sharing, and subscribing. As is my usual trajectory, I usually do my one video and kind of disappear for a while, but I actually have a lot of products, and I've already planned out a lot of other videos, so I am kind of a little bit more in a in a better space to get more content out. So like I said, join the family, and I'm sure that future videos will be should be pretty interesting for many people. For those who don't know, a lot of my content is a little bit more Android based, but I definitely take suggestions for whatever products people might be interested in seeing me talk about. And I also have a blog, techiesupreme.com, where you can kind of see a little bit more everyday updates of news reports and my personal written analysis on things that are going on in tech. So until next time, bye.